On your timeline now in the top left-hand corner, you have timeline number 3. This is exploration. All right, for exploration, what do you think our clusters are above all else? What do you think we're going to put? So, humanism isn't, shut up and listen, humanism isn't a bad answer because humanism can apply to almost everything. But first and foremost, we're going to put science up here. We're going to put science up here. In many ways, exploration helps lead to the scientific revolution, and you can argue leads to enlightenment. You can't navigate by stars unless you actually study the stars and go from there. All right? So, but first, of course, we should have written off to the side of our cluster box what? The triangle. Okay, our last timeline Reformation destroyed the triangle by weakening the traditional power of the priests. For exploration, do you know how exploration is going to weaken the triangle? What it's going to do is, with exploration comes trade and money. That money, when it flows into a country, is going to do two things. Number one, it's not going to go to the old-timey fat nobles sitting in their castles with a pile of gold in the basement. It's going to go to the new elite. Write down new elite there if you want to. The other thing is, when we talk about exploration on a massive scale and eventually international trade, the old-timey nobles and even some of the new elite, they can't quite manage that. So it's going to put more power and money into the hands of kings. We are leading to absolute monarchies. And again, think about how bad the feudal system was. Absolute monarchies are an improvement over the traditional feudal system. So strengthening of the kings is a pretty good point. The other thing we're going to write down is cultural interaction. For cultural interaction, I know that's a fancy schmancy word, but really what that means is it is the West, so Europe, is meeting the East. Okay, that is Asia, primarily where the term comes from, but let's say non-West, so Africa, Asia, and the New World. Those interactions are generally not equal, right? We're going to go exploration, which leads to disease and death and slavery. Then we're going to have colonialism and imperialism, and eventually we'll destroy colonialism after the world wars, but it's going to take a while. Those are the big ones, and I think that's how it connects to everything else. So over here, number 1, we're going to talk about, let's say, old trade. Old trade and Henry. I don't care. Original color, OG color for our times. We're going to do 1400, 1500, and 1600. 1400, 1500, and 1600. So, for the old trade, it's the only thing we're going to have on this top left side of our timeline. It kind of ends here-ish. Let's put it right there. Right here, we're going to write down the center of trade. The center of trade for the world before 1492 was where? It was the Indian Ocean, okay? Everybody wanted to get to the Indian Ocean to trade. China trades there, India trades there, all right? Why do Europeans specifically want to get to trade in the Indian Ocean? What good do they want first? Spices, good. Silk. The other key concept goods that they want are gold. Not a wrong answer, because we will write down spread religion. We talked about the concept that the Garden of Eden is somewhere in the east. We talked about priests wanted spices and other fancy smelling stuff to use in church. Again, imagine the priest with the big dangly incense ball thing just going around. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. Some of you are very confused, but that's exactly what they want. They want these things in order to spread. So they start paying money for these things. There's value, there's money, there's need in these things. And remember, the old way that we got these goods was that we left Italy, the boot. We went through the Mediterranean Ocean to the Black Sea, and then we hopped on what? The Silk Road. We traveled on the Silk Road to go to the east. This is Marco Polo. This is the origins of trade when Mediterranean was king. The problem with the Silk Road is twofold, though. Number one, you travel by horseback, and horses just can't carry that many goods when you compare it to boats, right? Number two, you have to travel through the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire doesn't really like Europe at this time for various reasons, so you have to pay a hefty fine to travel through it. All right, so that's our early exploration. All right, who is the original guy? Is Henry the Navigator? What country is Henry the Navigator from? He's from the one that would most benefit from finding a different trade route. Portugal has to pay fines, right, to go through Spain and France and Italy and all the other countries in order to get to the Silk Road. They're the farthest from these places. So they would benefit the most if we found another way to get to India. All of these goals are getting to India. Now, where does Henry the Navigator navigate to? Nowhere. Henry the Navigator is the patron. He's the patron of exploration, the financier. Under Henry the Navigator, we are going to put the new navigational technology. And before you say anything, there's a list of a whole bunch of them, but the one you will always mention is Caravel. Caravel is the boat that holds all of this technology. It's Portugal's biggest invention for all of our European history in this class. Their most notable contribution, the Caravel. It's much better at traveling the open ocean. It can carry more goods and be much more stable. But what are the other pieces of technology? Let's go with the two improvements to the boat. One is the lateen rig. The lateen rig is a different way of setting up the sails that allows you to sail in the open ocean. You can sail basically 360 degrees. You can sail anywhere, even if the wind isn't directly pointing that way. We also add the stern post rudder. The stern post rudder is a big thing that dangles underneath the boat. Basically, it gives it stability in the open ocean. The other ones we had were the magnetic compass, and the astrolabe. Astrolabe, as we can tell, is basically a device using the night sky to tell what latitude I think you are at and where you can where you're traveling to. Okay, that's it for this color. That's the old trade network, the old setup for trade. Number 2, we're going to talk about the countries. You can give me about a third to half of the space at the bottom, and let's write country order. We already mentioned that Portugal is first, so let's write them down. Now, the key concepts lists all of the places that they explored. I think that's or at least they're most famous or most drastic for exploring. I think that's a little bit overkill, but let's mention them here since they're key concepts. Mostly, Portugal is trying to get to where? Yes, the Indian Ocean, but landmass, where are they trying to get? Asia, right? India is part of Asia, so they're trying to get to Asia. The best way to get to Asia is to go around Africa. And within that, what's the most important spot in Africa for exploration? South Africa. South Africa, okay? Again, that's the stopping point. But Portugal we don't spend too much time on because as a small country, they are quickly outmaneuvered by Big Brother next door. Anytime Portugal makes some kind of great advancement, it's going to move to Spain. So Spain joins the fight. You can write them down on the board. They're going to be around for a little bit, just enough to crash the entire economy and then move on. Where did they explore? Well, they also write down Asia and Africa. However, for them, we'll also note the New World. Where in the New World, most of all? Not wrong, but Caribbean is what they say. Here's spell Caribbean. Caribbean. Is that right?
Yeah.
Sure it's not Carribea? Oh, that's definitely wrong. All right. Let's do both. Carribbean, just to be sure. Okay, all right. Spain, though, is quickly outmaneuvered. There's one other country smaller than Spain, but still significant. It is the Netherlands. Thank you. So how I wrote it first. Never doubt me. The Netherlands, also known as the Dutch. Now, we're not going to write down where they explore because they explore all over the world, but we are going to write down what for the Netherlands? The Dutch East India Company. Technically, the largest company in the history of humankind, as far as value and structure and size go. They are primarily responsible with trading especially in India, but eventually the New World and all over the world. But Netherlands show up for a short time, but the Netherlands' big brother, of course, directly related, is who? Netherlands' big brother is England, and as soon as Netherlands gets some success, right, with New Amsterdam, England's eventually going to show up and take it over. That is, of course, our big boys, or France and England. Put a couple stars by England because they are going to have far more success in this era. Why is England going to have far more success in the era of the 1500s into the 1600s with things like exploration and trade? Because, no, what's the word for her?
Armada. Elizabeth.
What about Elizabeth? The first word we wrote down next to her name was stability, okay? Primarily because of religious persecution for the most part ends. She settles those tensions down. Then she defeats the Spanish Armada in 1588, and they will have the majority of the naval superiority and success throughout this trading era, all right? All of these things, if you have any space over here, you can write down something really obvious that's in the key concept, but what this does, when all these countries are now involved, this breeds rivalry. This rivalry, where different countries are trying to trade with the same spot or spots right next to each other, will lead to, what's the next step after exploration? No. Colonization or imperialism. And then finally, conflict or war, right? This is the process that they list in the key concepts, so I know it's obvious, but let's write it there. Next color, if you so desire, is Columbus. For Columbus, we'll finally put a date on our timelines, 1492. You don't even need to list it because you understand it. But after Columbus discovers the New World, use just the bottom here, just about an inch above the timeline. This is what is this era known as? Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange is when Christopher Columbus discovers the New World. We begin setting up trade between the Old World and the New. So let's go first, Old World to the New. Now, it's weird to me that there are like 10 goods listed for each of these things, all right? I'm not going to list all those or expect you to know them, so we'll give you the highlights. Which one is number one with a big star by it? What?
Smallpox.
Yes, smallpox. Seems weird to me that we classify that as a good that travels from the Old World to the New, but you cannot deny it had the largest impact, all right? That is the majority of the deaths for the populations in the New World come from population. The other two, if you just remember livestock, you're in a good spot, but it's horses and pigs. There are others, but that's what we care about. The New World to the Old. Okay, what's the most famous one that travels from the New World to the potatoes? Tomatoes is on the list, but we won't write it.
Three sisters.
Most notably?
Beans.
Corn and beans. Okay, corn, beans, and then, tobacco. Put a cash crop on there. Syphilis is on the list, but doesn't show up on the test that often. They're going to ask about smallpox if they ask about a disease, but that is a key concept. Guys, again, to connect it to future years, when we do, besides imperialism, what's the other timeline that comes after this?
Agricultural rev.
The Columbian Exchange brings new crops into Europe, and that's why in the 1600s, the Netherlands first, and then England starts to plant beans in those three-field system. That leads to an agricultural revolution. What comes after the agricultural revolution? Once we have plenty of food and plenty of people, then the industrial revolution, right? And then war and conflict and colonialism, right? They all play off each other, okay? Next up is, let's do the center of trade is in the Indian Ocean. After Christopher Columbus, the center of trade shifts from the Indian Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean. Let's put Atlantic economy. Or just Atlantic. You can use the whole top right, whatever you have left, just put center of trade, Atlantic. You can draw a line down the center. On the left side, if we're talking about trade in the Atlantic Ocean at this time, what's that called? No, the triangle trade. Why is it called the triangle trade? No, guy named Triangle invented it. All right, so the primary factor of the triangle trade is what? Slaves. And we should note, because it's in the key concept, where are slaves working in the New World? The answer, Caribbean, Brazil, Southern North America, all of that is correct. But where did they work there, Cain? Plantations is the word they'll use. Right? Really big, massive, basically industrial farms. And what is the good they're making at these plantations? Sugar. Okay? They are making tobacco and other stuff, but the answer is sugar. The vast majority of slaves are transported to use sugar. Now, where else are they working? What's the other good that comes from the New World? All that's tied with sugar. Gold. So where are they working? Mines. Mines, right? Now, early on, the slave labor comes primarily from Native Americans, right? But all of them die. Why do they die? Smallpox and other forms of brutality. But in the end, Europeans end up creating a slave trade from Africa to the New World. Plantations, the primary goods they list are sugar, rum, and tobacco. They do mention, again, in these key concepts, I want to write it down, the Dutch East India Company. But they mention in the key concepts, when the Netherlands start to drift away, who replaces the Dutch East India Company? The British East India Company. The Dutch East India Company is replaced by the British East India Company. The Dutch West India Company is the fictitious company in the Pirates of the Caribbean. The Dutch East India Company is originally set up to trade in India. Yes.
Oh my God.
You know it's not a documentary, right? Like there isn't a real Jack Sparrow and stuff like that, or the Dead Pirates things. We don't have time for this. All right. So on the other side, let's put social changes. Okay. The primary social change that comes out of exploration and early trade is there's a whole lot of money going into the economy, and where does most of that money go? The new elites. Double gold star, if you remember the new elites of France. No. It is called, no, not the sans-culottes. It is called the nobles of the robe. Robe, R-O-B-E. The nobles of the robe. Quiet. Bourgeoisie are generally the upper class, okay? So the bourgeoisie is still, for the most part, in the third estate at that time. They're the good guys, okay? So, the new elites, the nobles of the robe, how do they make their money in this era? Banking and merchants. So by financing and regulating trade is how they make this. The other change that I didn't know where to put on the timeline, so we're going to write it over here, is when we start international trade using really big ships and billions and billions and billions of dollars worth of goods, it's not going to be ran by the old-timey nobles, and even the new elite are going to struggle on that scale. Who starts to play a bigger and bigger role? The government. What do we call that? We see it emerge right here. It's called mercantilism. Describe mercantilism in 4 words. Favorable balance of trade, where we need to sell more than we buy. What are the 2 ways that we create a favorable balance of trade?
Tariffs.
Tariffs on foreign goods, and how else? What's the biggest thing? How do you make sure you can trade a whole bunch? You have a colony, have a foreign place that you own that you can make buy your goods. You can also argue subsidizing your own industry so that you can produce everything as good. Last question, or last color, please. Let's called exploitation. Exploitation. Now, when we talk about exploitation in this era, go ahead and write it. We usually mean West over non-West. That's how they'll term it. West over the non-West. The European countries dominating the non-European countries. And what is the primary reason, especially in the New World, that they're able to take over native populations? Once again, it is disease. Disease, most notably smallpox, decimates the native populations, and it's really hard to fight back when you're all dead. The other reason that they're able to dominate non-Western cultures, still relevant in the Americas, but more relevant in India and China, is through what? Military technology. We talked about inventions at this time, such as the mini ball, which is the first football-shaped bullet, right? We went from circle musket balls to mini balls, things like that. And the final thing, their goal is, they'll call it economic domination. That is the most reliable and effective way, but takes more time to set up, and that, of course, is colonies. And again, where does this timeline connect? We have things like the Columbian Exchange, which leads to more food in the agricultural revolution, which leads to the Industrial Revolution. We have competition between the countries. The most notable war, colonial war, is 1756 to 1763. That was the 7 Years' War, where England once again asserted dominance over the French. And then we ultimately have industrialization, imperialism, and the like. Thank you. That's it. Good night.